What do you do when the CEO of your company decides your $1,000 chair is just a little too nice for someone like you? Well, in my case, I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I just made sure every single person in that building saw exactly who the petty one really was, and it wasn't me. Welcome back to the Revenge Podcast. If you've ever been the underdog at work, watching some egotistical boss throw their weight around like they own you, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment if you've ever pulled off some sweet, silent office revenge. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm Alex, and today I'm bringing you a petty little tale of workplace revenge, where a power-hungry CEO learned the hard way that ego doesn't entitle you to my chair. Let me take you back a few years, a strange little chapter of my life, where I was temporarily living with my mom, my wife and I were in between homes, and my most prized possession at the time was a chair. Yeah, a chair. But not just any chair. This was a Herman Miller Aeron, a high-end ergonomic marvel that I'd snagged secondhand but still treated like royalty. It hugged your back just right, breathed in the summer, and basically cured lower back pain. It was the kind of chair that whispered asterisk, you matter. Asterisk, you know the type. If you've ever sat in one, you don't forget the feeling. It's a quiet sort of luxury. One that doesn't show off, but makes every hour of work feel just a little less soul-crushing. At the time, we were buying our house after years of renting. But the closing on our new place got delayed, which meant we had to shack up with my mother for a few weeks. Cozy? Sure. But I didn't want to cram all our furniture into her already full house. I'm talking every nook and cranny already taken. She had her own rhythm, her own system of organization, and tossing a high-end office chair into her carefully curated space just didn't feel right. So I got a little creative. I had a tech-adjacent job in a mid-sized company, about 120 employees, and decided to store a few small personal items in my office for the meantime. Among those, my beloved Aeron chair. It wasn't just storage either. I figured why not actually use it? The chairs at work were ancient, worn down, and just sad. And since I was usually one of the first in and last out, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. You have to understand. These office chairs were the type that squeaked every time you moved, sagged in all the wrong places, and left you with a lower backache by lunchtime. In contrast, my Aeron was smooth, responsive, supportive, the kind of chair that made you feel like you were working from a high-end design studio rather than a beige, fluorescent-lit cubicle maze. For a few days, things were calm. I'd roll into the office early, 8 a.m. sharp, grab a cup of awful break room coffee, and settle into my corner with the Rolls-Royce of office chairs beneath me. Nobody said anything. My manager knew. HR knew. Hell, even most of my team commented on how jealous they were. I figured, cool, people get it. Now, I want to pause here and talk about hierarchy, not the official kind, but the unspoken kind that creeps into offices. Titles matter, sure, but so do perceptions. And apparently appearances. It turns out that in some workplaces, the chair you sit in can say more about your perceived power than your actual job performance. And that brings us to the CEO. This guy was a mystery to most of us. He rarely showed up before noon, avoided mingling with staff, and held his meetings behind closed doors late in the day when half the office had already gone home. He was the kind of leader who wasn't interested in morale or presence, just optics and control. And apparently my chair rubbed him the wrong way. It started subtly. One morning, I walked in and found my chair sitting in the conference room. No big deal, I thought. Maybe someone borrowed it for a meeting and forgot to return it. I wheeled it back to my desk and didn't think much of it. The next day, same thing. Then it started showing up in different places, outside the executive office, in the hallway, even right behind the CEO's glass desk in the corner. It was strange, but again, I just retrieve it silently and roll it back to my little workstation. What struck me was how deliberate it felt. It wasn't just a case of shared equipment being borrowed, this was targeted. My chair was the only one that ever went missing. And every time, it somehow migrated closer and closer to the CEO's space. To be clear, I never wheeled it into his office, that would have been bold. No, it always ended up outside, like someone was sneaking it in during the morning shuffle, but didn't want to get caught. I started locking it to my desk when I left. But by morning, still gone. That's when the CEO's assistant got involved. She was one of the kindest, most overworked people I've ever met. The kind of person who deserves hazard pay just for putting up with a power-hungry narcissist 5 days a week. One morning, she approached me, visibly awkward, and said, "Hey, can we talk for a second?" I nodded, and we stepped into a quiet hallway near the printer. She said, and I quote, "The CEO doesn't think it's appropriate that you have a nicer chair than he does. This causing confusion. People are asking if your desk is his." I blinked. She continued, "He's been really stressed about it. I know it's your chair. I know you brought it from home, but he really thinks it sends the wrong message." I wanted to laugh, but instead, I nodded with the kind of serious expression that people wear during performance reviews. I could see the exhaustion in her face. This wasn't her battle, but she was being made to fight it. And so I told her, calmly and sincerely, "I completely understand. I'll stop fighting over it." She smiled, clearly relieved, and walked off. She probably thought that meant I'd give in. That was her mistake, because that afternoon, during lunch, I wheeled my beloved errand chair out of the building, straight into my car, parked in the front lot like always, and that, dear viewer, is when the real petty revenge began. Every morning for the next week, it became a strange sort of ritual, a petty war waged in silence. I'd come into the office, still bleary-eyed from the early start, drop my bag, and there it was, my chair gone, again. I'd sigh, trudge toward the conference room or past the CEO's fancy open desk area, and, like clockwork, I'd find my errand there, gracing someone else's rear. Now, to the untrained eye, it might seem harmless. Just a chair, a temporary borrowing, maybe even something easily overlooked in the day-to-day churn of office life. But if you've ever owned something that fits you just right, something you've paid for with your own money, that has molded itself to your body and comfort like a second skin, you know it's not just a chair. It's your chair. And more than that, it was the principle. I wasn't trying to make some status statement or flaunt anything. My errand wasn't new, wasn't shiny. It was secondhand, a little scuffed on the base, but it supported my lower back like a devoted partner. After years of backaches and dodgy plastic seats, I'd finally found something that let me sit for hours without feeling like I was 90. And now, here it was being hijacked. The CEO's passive-aggressive theft grew increasingly obvious. He didn't ask. He didn't send an email. He didn't even pretend to borrow it. He'd just have it rolled over to his desk or into his meeting room, like it had magically become communal property. First, I chuckled. Then I grumbled. And then I started keeping score. Monday, conference room. Tuesday, CEO's corner. Wednesday, still at his desk from the night before. Thursday, back in the corner office with his assistant standing guard like it was some throne. I started imagining the CEO in a royal robe, sipping espresso with pinky raised while lounging in my chair, spinning slowly as he mused about quarterly profits. Meanwhile, I was slumped over on one of those old office chairs that creaked every time I adjusted. By Thursday, I'd started to feel, well, let's just say done. The irritation simmered under my skin, not yet rage, but a quiet seethe. There was something deeply insulting about someone taking something personal of yours simply because they believed they deserved it more. Not because they needed it. Not because you offered. But because they could. That's when Natalie approached. Natalie, the CEO's assistant, was one of the kindest people in the entire company. Always polite, always overworked. She carried the weariness of someone who had to juggle napalm personalities and delicate egos all day long. She walked over slowly, the kind of approach where you know someone doesn't want to have the conversation they're about to start. "Hey," she said softly, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" "Sure," I said, though I had a sinking feeling. She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Listen, the CEO's a little bothered." "About what?" I asked, already guessing. Natalie winced. "It's the chair." I blinked. "My chair." "He's not comfortable with someone else having a nicer chair than him," she said quickly, as if saying it faster made it sound less ridiculous. "He thinks it might confuse people, like, maybe they'll think your desk is his." I stared. I actually laughed a little. Couldn't help it. She held up her hands, almost apologetically. I know. It's dumb. Believe me, I know. But he's been upset. And I've had to basically fight for it every day on his behalf. I felt bad for her, truly. It wasn't her fault her boss had the emotional maturity of a toddler who wanted someone else's toy. And she had probably been caught in the crossfire of this absurd passive power play. I took a breath, nodding solemnly. I understand. I'll stop fighting over it. Natalie looked visibly relieved, thanking me quietly before shuffling back to her desk. What I didn't say, what I decided in that moment, was that I wasn't giving up. No, I was simply changing tactics. That lunch break, I wheeled the chair right out of the building and gently lifted it into the back of my car. I placed it there like it was a precious artifact being stored for safekeeping. The next day, Natalie came by again. Hey, where's the chair? I looked her dead in the eyes and replied with perfect calm. Since it wasn't appropriate for me to have a nicer chair than the CEO, I put it in my car. Her eyes widened, jaw half dropped. She didn't say another word. She just left. But here's where the real beauty of the PettyRevenge unfolded. Because every morning after that, without fail, my car was parked in its usual spot, right next to the walkway everyone used to enter the building. And through the tinted but still visible back window, my Herman Miller errand chair sat in full view. A frozen monument of absurd office politics. Like a giant middle finger to corporate ego. Everyone saw it. Some laughed. A few asked. Most just nodded with the kind of quiet respect reserved for someone who had chosen to outmaneuver arrogance without saying a single aggressive word. And the CEO? He never said a damn thing. By the end of that week, something had shifted. The awkward energy in the office became almost comedic. People had started noticing the chair saga and were quietly enjoying the absurdity of it all. A few coworkers who walked past my car in the mornings or during lunch breaks would smirk and give me a subtle thumbs up. Some whispered jokes about throne wars or called it the chair of power. Alex, the narrator of this tale, was no longer just another face in the office. My quiet defiance had turned me into something of a folk hero. I never said a word about it. I didn't boast or gloat, but people noticed. And more importantly, so did the CEO. That Monday, something changed. I arrived at my usual time, 8 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, mind already on my task list. As I walked toward my desk, I could feel it, that heavy, lingering silence. A few people glanced up at me and then quickly looked away, like they didn't want to be caught watching. My chair, the regular standard issue one, was in its place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is, until I opened my email. There it was, a meeting invite from the CEO's assistant. Subject line, brief sync, office equipment and facilities. Now, maybe if this had happened before the chair saga, I might have been worried. Maybe even a little nervous. But now? I was amused. The meeting was set for 12:30 p.m. in conference room B. I took my time finishing my tasks for the morning and went in calmly, notebook in hand. The CEO was already seated at the far end of the long conference table. His assistant sat to his left, her eyes darting nervously. The CEO gave a tight-lipped smile, motioning for me to sit. Alex, he began, voice as smooth as old scotch. Thanks for coming. I wanted to discuss an issue that's been brought to my attention. I gave him my best poker face and nodded. Of course. It seems there's been a bit of confusion about office furniture. Personal items being brought in. Equipment allocation. That sort of thing. I nodded again. Ah, the chair. His assistant winced slightly. Yes, the CEO said, folding his hands together like he was about to deliver some profound revelation. You brought a rather luxurious office chair into a shared space. It was only temporary, I said. We were in between homes. I cleared it with HR. Just needed somewhere safe to store it. But surely you understand, he continued, voice lowering. Optics are important. People might get the wrong idea when a junior employee is seen with equipment that surpasses that of the executive level. Ah, there it was. The truth. The bruised ego. I leaned forward just slightly and kept my tone neutral. I understand. That's why I removed it from the office. The CEO didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, like he was trying to figure out what to say next. His assistant jumped in. "We appreciate your cooperation, Alex. It's just important to maintain a sense of order." "Of course," I replied, standing. "Anything else?" They both shook their heads. I walked out with a calm I hadn't expected. I didn't win a dramatic battle. There was no shouting match. But something about that meeting told me everything I needed to know. My message had landed. From that day on, no one touched my stuff again. The CEO didn't look at me. His assistant nodded politely in the hallways but kept her distance. And the chair? Stayed in my car, like a silent trophy. In fact, I started calling it the Ice Throne. Not out loud, but to myself. It became symbolic. A petty rebellion against ego and entitlement, carried out without raising my voice or causing drama. And strangely, it earned me respect. Not because I was loud or confrontational, but because I was quietly immovable. That chair, sitting there in the trunk, became a symbol of how far a little dignity, patience, and just the right amount of passive aggression could go in a world full of petty tyrants. And the irony? The CEO eventually got a new chair, a high-end model approved by procurement. But the shine had worn off. Everyone knew why he wanted it. And everyone remembered who made him want it. It wasn't about furniture anymore. It was about pride. And mine stayed nicely cushioned in the back of my car. It's funny how something as seemingly mundane as an office chair can become the centerpiece of a quiet act of rebellion. But in the gray corridors of corporate monotony, sometimes the smallest wins are the most memorable. In the weeks that followed, my Herman Miller throne sat comfortably in the trunk of my car. There was something beautifully ironic about it. Every morning as employees trickled into the building, they passed by my parked car. And sitting right there in the back, through the tinted rear window, they could all see the unmistakable silhouette of that iconic meshback chair. People began to talk. First it was my coworkers asking, half-jokingly, "So, is your chair living in your car now?" Then came the side eyes from other departments, whispers in the hallway, the smirks in the break room. Word spread and the story grew legs. It became the unofficial office inside joke. One guy from accounting even brought popcorn and mockingly sat on the trunk of his own car one morning, joking, "Waiting for the Chair Wars finale." We laughed, and I gave him a slow, dramatic nod. I never had to say anything to most people. They knew. The assistant must have talked, or perhaps someone had overheard our conversation. But regardless, the symbolism was clear. I wasn't going to let the CEO bully me out of something I owned, something I brought, and something I was entirely entitled to. I just refused to play the game on his terms. What struck me most was how this little act of passive resistance empowered others. It sounds exaggerated, but I started noticing small things. People stood their ground a bit more during meetings. One woman from HR stopped folding when the CEO tried to push a last-minute deadline. Someone actually brought in a footrest from home and dared to keep it under their desk. Baby steps, sure, but steps nonetheless. As for the CEO, oh, he stewed. You could feel it. He would walk in later than usual, glancing, pretending not to glance, out the window toward the parking lot. His usual smug aura seemed dented. He never brought up the chair again. Not a word. Not through his assistant, not through HR, not even an offhand comment in passing. He lost. And the best part? I didn't have to raise my voice, file a complaint, or go to war. I just parked. I let the silence and visibility of my decision speak for itself. Eventually, my wife and I moved into our new house, and the chair finally came home with me. It reclaimed its rightful place in my home office. Every time I sat in it, I remembered the power of quiet defiance, of standing your ground with grace, of being petty, the smart way. Years have passed since then, but I still stay in touch with a few former coworkers, and now and then, the chair saga comes up in conversation. "Hey, remember when you parked your dignity in the lot for all to see?" One of them texted me just last month, and I did. I still do, because petty revenge? It isn't always loud or explosive. Sometimes it's just poetic.